Today, I want to talk about 5 big things that I've learned about bass behavior that I truly believe can help you to become a better angler. Whether you fish in ponds, rivers, or lakes, from the bank or from the boat, I think you can apply some of this and it's going to help you to catch more and bigger fish. Number 1, bass are truly apex predators. And when I say apex predators, I don't want you to think that I'm saying bass are like killer whales, all right? They're not that intelligent, but bass are extremely well built to be able to hunt in the surroundings that they deal with. If you think about a bass and where they live across the country, you have bass that live in extremely clear bodies of water with heavy current, with no current or really low visibility. There's all kinds of different situations that bass live in, and you see bass thrive in a lot of these different situations. Between their eyesight, their sense of smell, and their lateral line, bass have an extremely acute awareness of their surroundings. One good example of this is I always thought that fishing, something like a drop shot in dirtier water, a finesse presentation in kind of muddier water, it was pretty much pointless, because I thought there's no way that the bass are going to be able to see that, feel it, hear it, whatever it may be. They're not going to be able to locate that particular bait. But then I was fishing a Bassmaster Open years and years ago, and I was flipping and pitching a creature bait into wood cover. And guess what? My co-angler in the back was throwing a drop shot on spinning rod in muddy water, and he was catching more fish and bigger fish than myself. And not only can bass detect finesse lures in muddy water, but I think a lot of times as anglers, we actually fish baits that scare the bass away. I think that this is something that we do often, and I think that it's also being proven right now by guys that are using jig head minnows with forward-facing sonar to catch bass. This little jig head minnow has really taken the industry by storm over the last couple of years. It is catching bass absolutely everywhere, and the thing is basically motionless. Like, there's not a lot to it. Now, speaking of jig head minnows, I do want to let you guys know that right now at Omnia Fishing, which is today's sponsor, you can get the Smeltinator jig head as well as scented jerk shads at an extreme discount. This is a sale that is only going to last a few more days. I will put it down here below. So if you guys are interested in picking up some of these jig head minnows, the ones that have been catching fish absolutely everywhere, go ahead and click those links down below in the description. Now, the second thing that you should know about bass is timing is everything. This is something that I have always known, but it's something that I have really learned over the last couple of years when it comes to looking at bass with my forward-facing sonar. Now, whether you have forward-facing sonar or not, whether you like it or not, you can still learn from this technology about bass. Years ago, I was fishing a tournament on a lake near me, and I had found several fish on a point. And this is way before I had forward-facing sonar. I'd cast up there with a crankbait and actually caught 2 fish on the same crankbait. And I decided to leave that point alone. I would come there during the tournament the next day and hopefully catch a lot of bass. Well, the next day came, I went right to that point and I started casting up there. I caught nothing. I came back about 3 hours later, casted up there, nothing. I was completely heartbroken at this point, but lo and behold, I came back about another 2 hours later, literally towards the end of the day, and I'm like, I have just got to give this thing one more try. I believed so much that the fish were here on this point. I pulled up on this point and I literally loaded the boat. We ended up doing really well, me and my partner, in this tournament. We absolutely loaded the boat, and I will never forget that day because it made me realize how important timing was. Now, with the advancements of technology, using forward-facing sonar, I now realize why you pull up to areas like that at times and don't catch any fish, and then someone can come behind you and absolutely load the boat. And the big 2 behaviors that I've realized from bass that it kind of impacts the timing is, 1, a lot of times there are bass in an area, but they're simply not active. But a lot of times what makes these fish, these inactive fish, all of a sudden active is simply bait coming into the area. What I've seen a lot is bass will be in a general zone. They'll be in an area. They'll be on a point. They're not active. All of a sudden, a school of shad comes by, a pod of bluegills comes by, and all of a sudden they go to start eating. That activates them. So sometimes you simply have to kind of luck in to pulling up on a place when that school of bait fish happens to be moving in that area. Now, if you pay attention to the bait fish, sometimes you'll realize that they will be in certain parts of the body of water that you're fishing during certain parts of the day. That way that can kind of help you zone in on when the bass are going to be active. For instance, they might be pushed up real shallow during the middle of the day, or they may be in a certain area only in the morning. That can help you to make sure that you are timing bass correctly. The other thing about timing that I've learned with forward-facing sonar is bass are almost always on the move. This is something that I did not realize before having that forward-facing sonar, is bass are almost always moving around. They may be in a general zone, but they are moving all over in that zone. And so sometimes you may pull up to that exact place where you caught the fish the day before, like I did in that tournament, and you're casting there, but the bass may literally be 20 yards away or 30 yards away. But because you are so influenced by that day before and you are wanting to cast in this one area, you don't even think to expand a little bit in that zone. So that's something that I've really learned to do, is expand in the zones or those areas that I'm fishing to try and catch fish. The third thing that I have learned about bass behavior is that bait action and noise trumps color. I have said this a ton on this channel, and I'm gonna continue to say it, but I think that too many anglers get caught in the color game. They think that you have to have the perfect color in order to catch a lot of bass on there. Now, you do have to have a little bit of common sense here, but really if you stick to kind of your natural colors, your green pumpkins, your like shad color whites, your blacks, those are really the only colors that matter in fishing. And so what I have learned is that action of your bait or the noise that your bait makes are way more impactful on if a bass is going to bite that than the color. If you see fish that are following your bait, maybe you're bank fishing and you see that fish follow that bait in, or maybe you're looking at forward-facing sonar and you see a lot of fish coming up to a bait and going away. A lot of times simply changing to a bait that has a different action or a different noise to it is really going to help you to catch a lot more fish. I fished a tournament this summer. I caught a lot of fish on a deep diving crankbait that had a lot of rattles in it. I went the next week, I didn't catch nearly as many fish. I switched over to one that didn't have rattles in it, the exact same color, no rattles, and absolutely crushed them. As a matter of fact, I caught them better than I did with the bait with rattles on it, okay? But it was all about the noise there. And the big thing that I've learned is when in doubt, use a lure that almost has no action. Like look at a Ned rig, very little action, an absolute fish catcher. Look at that jig head minnow that I just talked about, very little action, catches the fire out of fish. Look at a Senko. Look at a standard weightless Senko, very little action as that thing falls, catches the fire out of fish. Now, with all that said about lures and bass behavior, I want to bring up point number 4, which is big swim baits are your best friend. I know that this may sound a little bit like a contradiction as to what I just talked about, but let me explain. Obviously, when you see a guy out there heaving a big swim bait around, whether that's a big glide bait style swim bait or maybe a big soft plastic swim bait, and they're catching giant bass on it, I mean, you look at the Ben Millikens of the world, it looks like a ton of fun. And it is a ton of fun when the bass are biting those baits. But they're not always biting those baits. There's a lot of days that you go out there and those fish are not going to commit to that bait. But what I've learned about a big swim bait is that bass, even if they are extremely inactive, they will almost always at least follow those baits. And I cannot stress to you how important that is into locating fish. I have used a big swim bait a ton over the last really 2 years. I've used it for a while, but over the last like 2-3 years, I always have a glide bait and a big soft plastic swim bait on the front deck of my boat. And the sole reason is because I use those baits as tools to locate fish. I do not necessarily have to go out there and catch bass with those baits. I am just trying to locate them because, like I said, bass will almost always follow those baits even if they are inactive. So you may go into an area and you're not catching any fish and you may think that there are no fish in there. And something that I always do is at least spend a little bit of time throwing a big swim bait, because a lot of times if there are fish in there, they're gonna follow that bait to the boat where you can visibly see them with your own eyes, or if you have the forward-facing sonar, you can watch them come off the screen and follow your bait. This is something that I do almost everywhere I go, no matter the water clarity, no matter the depth that I'm fishing, because it allows me to be able to say, hey, there actually are fish in this area. Maybe my timing is off, like we talked about earlier. So then I might come back later in the day to that same area and actually be able to catch a lot of fish. This is something that happened to me this year. I was out there fishing, I fished through an area and I thought there's no fish here. I cast that big swim bait out and I saw like 5 or 6 fish pull off the bottom and follow that bait in. None of them hit it, but I saw these fish raise up. Now, if I had not thrown that swim bait, I would have never came back the next day to that area. But because I threw that swim bait, I knew that there was fish in that area. I came back the very next day, I threw a different bait and I caught a lot of fish. And so that is why a swim bait is your best friend. It's because it is a tool to help you locate bass. Now, the 5th thing you should know about bass fishing is really how many bass are actually in the lake that you're fishing. And this is something that I kind of have been shocked by over the last couple of years with forward-facing sonar, is just how many fish are in some of these areas. Because you may pull up to a point and catch 2 or 3 fish and you think you caught every fish there, but you can see that there are dozens in this area that are simply not biting. And I actually did a full video. It's actually a study that was done years ago that show us just how many fish are in some of these lakes that we have and how much anglers actually impact fishing. And I'm gonna leave a link for that video right here. So if you guys wanna know more about bass fishing and anglers' impacts on our fisheries, you can click that video. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to check out that Omnia deal, and I'll see you in the next video.